Hello and welcome to the Everybody Hates Your Brand podcast. My name is Rob Vose, a marketer with over 20 years experience working for some of the biggest brands and agencies in the world, and I'm your host. Today I'm joined by Simon Spire. Simon is an entrepreneur and data-driven marketer with experience at some of the best agencies in the UK. 5 months ago, he struck out on his own and started the company Data Agents, where he puts those years of experience to use. Their focus is on helping businesses to determine when and how to use Agentic AI to unlock the most value possible. So, settle in with your thermally excited beverage of choice as the weather gets chillier in the Northern Hemisphere, or maybe a cold beer if you're listening in the height of the Southern Hemisphere, and enjoy the next 30 minutes. So, as I said in the intro, I'm delighted to be joined today by Simon Spire. Welcome to the podcast, Simon.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me.
No, delighted to have you here, sir. At the start of every interview, we do what I call the credibility section. We have listeners from all over the world. So would you mind just giving us a bit of a backdrop into who you are and your career and your perspective, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, I guess I've always worked in marketing, and data has been the sort of red thread through my career, and particularly first-party data. So I've always worked with customer and transaction data. Started my career client-side at Sainsbury's, then I moved into the consulting world, then into the agency world, and then I had my own business for 6-7 years, advising clients on MarTech. And then for the last 8 years, I was leading data-driven performance marketing at an agency called Iris. And then about 6 months ago, I've founded Data Agents, and we're focused on making AI commercially usable for marketers. So I don't consider myself a AI theorist. I'm more of a practitioner and looking at how to deliver marketing outcomes.
Well, you're positioning yourself very nicely in what is a booming market. And if you look at, MarTech has always evolved quickly, but so much is changing right now, driven by AI. There's a great stat here that 77% of the new products added to the MarTech world in the last 12 months were AI native. Whether that's generative AI or predictive AI, which, predictive AI has been around for a while. I think it's really the generative AI that's has been the driving force behind a lot of these things. There's a great report called The State of MarTech 2025, which suggests that, quote, we're entering a liminal period, the in-between phase of a transformation where both the old and the new will coexist for some time. And they posit that's because the capability of AI is kind of growing exponentially. Organizations change logarithmically, i.e., it takes a long time for organizations, especially big ones, to figure out how to use this stuff and what they're going to do with it. And it's obviously a space as you've just talked about, we know that you operate in. So in your experience over in your own company, the last 6 months, but also going back further than that, what do you think, A, do you agree with that description? And B, what do you think are the determinants of how an organization can adopt it at pace versus those who are going to struggle a little bit more?
So I think it's definitely accurate. And I know it's something Scott Brinker has sort of talked about for a while, in terms of the rate of change through MarTech. And now I think it's being exacerbated by AI. My view is that the problem really is that most marketing organizations haven't actually really sort of changed how they operate in the last decade. So they weren't really ready for the sort of era of MarTech and AdTech. They didn't really sort of adapt for that. And now you've got AI and all of the noise around AI, and that's kind of shining an even greater light on the marketing organization and how it operates. And I think organizations have to think about, and the ones that succeed think about data, people, process, and technology. And AI can help solve for and figure out different parts of that mix. It can do amazing things with data, and it can fix data problems, and it can fundamentally change workflows. But just throwing AI into the mix is just really sort of throwing fuel on the fire. So I think organizations that are sort of set up to succeed are the ones that set some guardrails, they place some bets, they allow experimentation, they're interested in results, and they use those results to build confidence. The ones that struggle don't really have that sort of clarity on what success looks like. I think quite often AI is a bit of a project rather than a sort of system shift or, something that's fundamentally transformative. And they sort of just get into this proof of concept purgatory and never sort of move on. And like I say, this is nothing new. It's something I've sort of observed for the last 10 years. I just think it's become more and more pronounced and more surfaced through the change that AI is enabling.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got friends work at big companies who've basically just been given a simple mandate of start everything with AI. So what on earth is that? Like, what does that mean? That's just such a nonsense sentence. And I think it's an interesting dilemma. I think, and now we've kind of, because the AI has kind of started. Didn't start, but the floodgates opened with ChatGPT, right? Obviously we've had AI for a very long time, but in the public consciousness, that was the kind of the moment. And now with that pace of change, we've moved into from not just like, oh, isn't this clever? I can type normal sentences and it will give me back an answer, to agentic AI, to other AI agents talking to other AI agents, and how that's growing and acting independently. And it's this idea of autonomously solving problems set by humans. And I think you had a great quote, a LinkedIn post or somewhere else, where it was basically, if it just follows your instructions, it's automation, which I think is a really, really good line. But one of the things that strikes me, and again in that Martech report, they talk about the idea of a complex system versus a complicated system. And it talks about adding AI into a stack makes it less deterministic as a system, i.e. I specifically know if I put this input out, I'm going to get that output, into maybe something that's slightly more probabilistic, where cause and effect is possible to sort of discern, but it's not necessarily the exact answer that you're predicting is the exact answer you're going to get. Given LLM the same prompts, it might give you the exact same response. So my question in that world, and when you've been working from an agentic perspective, is how does a brand keep some sense of control in that kind of ecosystem? Is there a concern around building trust for agentic AI in that context? How have you seen it done well?
Sort of conceptually, I actually don't think much has changed. If we let's put aside AI for a second. In the world before AI, you'd have a team. You'd give that team a set of tasks. You'd give people a set of tools, and you'd tell them, "This is your job description. This is what I want you to do. Some clear objectives," and those people would then get on and do the work. And the reality is that each person would probably do that work a little bit differently, but with hopefully using the same framework and instructions that you'd give them. But everybody would have a degree of autonomy in terms of how they operate and go about fulfilling that task. And then once that's completed, you'd evaluate the task. So you'd either have someone QA the work, but you'd certainly be giving that team member a performance review a couple of times every year. And then you'd also be looking at your whole team and thinking, what's the profile of that? Are we doing the right type of work? Is it performing? Who needs promoting? Is there somewhere where someone we need to intervene with and give them some training or some development support? And I actually think we just need to think about agents and agentic AI the same way. So the questions would be, what's the management approach for an agent? How do you do in inverted commas, a performance review of an agent? What's the equivalent of the HR process? Because, like you say, we've moved from that sort of deterministic to probabilistic. This isn't about automation. It's about something that autonomously solves a problem. So I think if you frame it like that, you can start to figure out, this is how we can put the right guardrails in place. This is how we can build trust. This is how we can have transparency about what we're doing. And I think it's helpful to think about it like that, because for many organizations, that sort of nuts and bolts of people and talent management is actually where they excel. And so it should actually be much less daunting to apply it to a agentic AI era. So it's not about control per se. It's more about confidence in the outcomes? How do we audit? How do we make sure that the data has the right provenance? How do we monitor the outcomes? How do we audit for ethics and all of those sort of things? And I think if you do that, that trust will ultimately be built through that transparency and humans ultimately being accountable for those things that are working autonomously for them, rather than having this sort of opaque world where these agents are running off and doing these crazy things and no one really knows what they're doing or why they're doing it. So I do think it's helpful just to think about it conceptually rather than sort of worrying about you've got having autonomous robots taking on a life of their own.
Yeah, I love that idea of an AI performance review as a way of kind of keeping an eye on things. It's a really lovely metaphor. It's just interesting the pace at which this is changing and the pace at which AI has become, think of all these, I'm not saying all these down to AI, but you think about all the job loss numbers that are happening across tech industry at the moment and all those kind of things. Do you find when people come to you, is it, I want to use AI and what can AI do for me? Or is it, when should I use it? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it a case of are people clear about what it can do and when they should use it rather than just, oh, AI, I feel like I need to do something about this? If that makes sense.
So the way I tend to engage with my clients is actually, we don't talk about AI to start with. We actually talk about what their business challenge is or what the opportunity is. And then a secondary question is, well, how could AI help us do things faster or better? So I think, I'm yet to have a conversation with a client where they're coming to me saying, we need to make these headcount savings and how can AI do that? And that, to be honest, that doesn't really interest me. The things that interest me within the marketing world is really, how do we use AI as a value driver? How do we point it at things that make our marketing more effective? And so that tends to be how I don't know, engaging with clients and the problems that clients are coming to me to help them solve.
It's nice to hear that they are not coming to you with like, how do I reduce my headcount as their first thought. There's something quite comforting about that. So let's talk about effectiveness and talk about some of those things. And there's some really interesting research from Cornell University that shows when, I was doing some digging this myself recently around like the training, how you train an AI model. And, I am in highly potential Dunning-Kruger waters here, so I have to be very careful about the level of knowledge that I have here. But the idea of you have pre-training and then post-training, where pre-training is very much just feed it what you want to feed it, untrammeled, let it identify the connections, figure stuff out. And then post-training is where humans come in and kind of go, well, does that make sense for us? Does that work in the model? Is that the kind of output that we're wanting? And it talks about the idea that actually maybe within that human biases favor familiarity, and bringing some behavioral science into this, and that people kind of like go for the vanilla, for want of a better way of putting that. And the idea of an average internal email or a line of code might be fine, but let's say we're talking about creative work, for example. How concerned are you about mediocrity of output, if you like, the kind of regression to the mean, and how do you sort of try and work around that or prevent that, if you like?
Yeah, it's a totally legitimate concern. It's also, I think, a key reason. The work that I do is really looking at how we use AI in strategy to understand the as is and to understand opportunity, using AI for data management, using AI in analytics. But it's also why the solutions that we're working on are always guided by humans. However, I think all of that is quite reflective of now. And I think the only sort of prediction that I think it's safe to make is that AI will get better. And if you look at the things that, VO4 and, some of the video content tools that now exist, I think it's fair to assume that AI will become sort of increasingly brilliant at production and distribution. The role then for us as humans is to think about how are we raising the bar, how are we challenging those things to be more creative, and how do we raise the ceiling on how we're using these tools and what we expect the outputs to be, rather than just expecting the sort of floor to be raised, because I think then we are just sort of working to the average and we're not sort of really challenging things. So I don't know if that sort of fully answers your question, but it's just my sort of perspective on where AI excels, but also, the fact that it is only going to get better, even though there's these sort of legitimate challenges at the moment.
Yes. Well, a bit of inside baseball here. You sent me a fantastic article or you posted on LinkedIn, so a fantastic article about the idea of not seeing AI as a tool, but seeing it as an instrument.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one. I'll put the link of the article in the show notes, because I thought that was one of the better articles I've read on the role of AI and how it works and how you can use it creatively. There's some amazing, extraordinary examples in there. But I think it is one of those things. I think too many people see the speed of output. That's good enough is a phrase I think we're going to have to be very, very wary of. I think going forwards, especially from a creative perspective. And it will be, my least favorite phrase in marketing is, we've just got to get something out. It's like, you can see that happening in that regard. The other thing that I think is really interesting in relation to sort of effectiveness and how it's affecting experiences and how people act with brands is AI as an intermediary in e-commerce and the e-commerce experience, whether that's the impact of AI-generated answers through search impacting web traffic. We're even starting to see that now with email. Your carefully crafted copy in an email is being, Apple and the like are creating sort of summaries of that. That's going to have a huge impact from an email perspective.
Yeah.
All the way through to initiatives like Walmart have got to deal with OpenAI to allow shoppers to buy directly through ChatGPT. And we were, talking briefly about before this meeting about the Amazon and Perplexity having some fun and games between each other. How do you see that kind of disintermediation or intermediation affecting marketing strategies? Does it make brands more important, less important? Like, how do you see that world going?
Yeah, I think it's quite a profound change, and it's it's happening now. I think this sort of idea of the zero interface, it is fundamentally changing how we think about the customer journey and the path to purchase, and those things have never been perfectly linear. They've always been squiggly, but I think that interface is changing, and I can see this sort of emerging industry of marketers trying to game the LLMs so that their brand sort of is appearing in AI search and so on. Just like we had an industry that was gaming the Google search algorithm. In terms of your question about, I guess, what does this mean for brands? I actually think it depends a bit on the category. So I think if you're in a low interest category, low complexity, low sort of mental availability, a lot of stuff that actually take Amazon again, a lot of the stuff you might buy on Amazon or that's habitual is probably the stuff that you will devolve some level of decision making or research at least to an AI search agent. And so in those instances, I think there probably is a smaller role for brand, and the focus moves more to being about efficiency. How do we show up at the right time? How do we make it easy to buy? Is the fulfillment really good? And when I was thinking about this, I was sort of thinking it's a bit like those sort of products that when your online groceries are delivered and the driver goes, "Oh, we've had to subsidy this for that," and you just sort of shrug your shoulders and go, "Yeah, that's fine."
Yeah.
I know it's within X and Y in terms of the price point, and yes, I know I'm going to be able to cook, my meal tonight or whatever with it. So I think for those sort of brands, it's AI and AI agents will end up fulfilling quite a lot of that process. I think for higher interest, higher complexity, higher value, I guess sort of considered purchasers, brands will be key, and I can actually only see that getting more important in terms of where do you show up what's the affinity, what's the awareness? Do you want to research it further? And yes, that brand will need to be visible in AI, but all of the associations, the trusts, verified reviews, I think will still be critical.
Yeah.
So it will be, about data accessibility, what are the signals of trust, first party data relevance, all of those sort of things I think become disproportionately important. But
yeah,
I think there will be this sort of, I don't know, perhaps it's always been there, this sort of spectrum of brands that, are going to become and continue to be really important, and others where it's much more of a sort of transactional relationship, and actually people are indifferent to the brand, however sad that might be for the marketing team trying to take it to market.
I also think that might change depending on the person.
Yeah.
So, for example, don't give me ketchup if it's not Heinz. Like, what are we doing here? And both my wife and I are Diet Coke addicts, or somebody described it, I think it was on TV, cigarette fridge. So a fridge cigarette, which I just thought was a fantastic term for a Diet Coke.
Yeah.
And I think, you're absolutely right. There are some brands where it's like, well, if it's butter, it's like, whatever, just, I don't care. Where somebody might have a real passion for something. So it's an interesting dilemma, because it's kind of like you want to create, if you're in a low interest one, you maybe want to create mental availability so that you become the default. But like, that's in a highly competitive market, that's super expensive and all those kind of things. So it's certainly going to be an interesting.
Right. I think it'll also depend on kind of like the moment in time. It's like, distress purchase versus,
yes,
Heinz might be the only thing you're willing to put on your chips, but if you've got a family to feed and that's the only thing that's been delivered in the last 5 minutes, you'd probably put own label on, or whatever it might be. So there's
give me something.
A whole sort of set of criteria that I think will become quite different.
And I still think the brand that is remembered is the brand that is bought. Still plays in this space, whether that's a high interest or a low interest category. Like, am I able to invoke you? Can I remember you? Oh, have a look at these 3 or 4 different brands for me. For like I'm buying a car or something, what are the brands that I'm interested in? Anyway, so you obviously have access to a lot of interesting. You've probably seen a lot of interesting things over the last sort of 6 months, whether it's something you've been working on or something you've seen in your research and in terms of helping clients. So, what would you say is the, I don't know, coolest, most fun, or most impressive implementation of agentic AI that you've seen, and what is it about it that makes it so cool?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm not sure about the sort of funnest, but and actually, I mean, bit of a plug, and maybe we can put a link to it in the notes or something, but we've just done some research and some LinkedIn posts on 10 of the best examples that we've seen marketers using agents. Absolutely. And I think Klarna have been doing some quite smart stuff around customer service. Sweaty Betty have been doing some good stuff around personalization. But I think the one that I like, again, thinking about outcomes, Expedia have been doing some really good work and have built a sort of suite of agents that proactively intervenes when there's disruption. So, imagine your trip and there's a cancellation. And so it's automatically helping resolve those disruptions. It's issuing credits, and then it's sort of following up with retention offers and so on. And I just think that's a really interesting way of sort of proactively intervening to recover a situation in a way that we just couldn't do, with humans. You just need so much scale. And also, I think it's interesting because it sort of starts to blur that line between customer service and loyalty, as well as then having that sort of pretty clear benefit to the business in terms of reduced inbound contact. There's less customer effort, which I think is interesting, and then you get to a resolution faster. So it's autonomous. It's the efficiency and the outcomes that it's delivering that I think are, in inverted commas, really cool.
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting, especially in a context where you're dealing probably with a lot of stressed people.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. I'd love to know how they trained those and and what their level of what they're able to deal with and what they're not. It'd be an interesting one to dig into. And we will absolutely put in the show notes the 10 examples that you're
Brilliant.
talking about.
Thank you.
So so the last question on AI, let's get down to some sort of brass tacks, if you like. If you were to give brands 3, 4, however many you feel like, practical, useful steps on what they can do to get started generating AI, value from AI, what would they be and why?
Well, I'd go back to something you said earlier on, which I think you said one of your friends had been sort of told we need to be AI first. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. It's like being told we need to be digital first. It's just utterly meaningless.
Or mobile first. Yeah.
So I would sort of cut the crap with any of that and actually don't think about AI. Go back to what is the problem that we've got, or where do we see the opportunity? What are the things that we want to be able to do? And then think about, well, is there a role for AI to play in those particular use cases? Think about how do we use AI to make it easier to prove, easier to test, easier to create a sort of shorter path to value. But also don't just take your existing process or workflow and drop a load of AI into it, because that's also a recipe for disaster. It's almost, let's think about the outcome, let's think about the business opportunity, and then let's figure out what a fresh workflow might look like, and then let's think about the role of AI around that. So I would definitely sort of apply those, hopefully 3 or 4 practical steps, and then I would get started as well, because there's just this sort of resistance in a lot of organizations. And I actually think there's a bit of a sort of disconnect between, I think at the C-suite, there's quite often sort of lofty expectations around AI and it's going to transform our cost base and all this sort of stuff. Then you get a bit of a void, to be honest, where there's not much going on. And then the reality that everybody is using ChatGPT on the side of their desks, or there's actually amazing AI baked into the ESP that the marketer's using, or, you know, but actually no one's sort of thinking about it in those terms. So I do think by sort of being practical, not just sort of obsessing over AI, and actually going back to probably what I said at the start in terms of, you know, how do we organize as a marketing team? How do our marketing operations work? And then let's start with that, and that will help us figure out the role that AI could and should play in what we're doing.
I think the key word you talked about there was workflows, and the idea of, okay, because you're right, is somebody just using, you know, when I was strategy director, I would use Perplexity as like a junior research assistant, but I would also make sure that I wasn't putting client data into a tool that I personally had a personal subscription for versus. So I think that's an interesting challenge for people. It's like, okay, well, people are starting to use AI more and more in their own personal lives, whether that's ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it might be, versus maybe a more bespoke solution for a given organization. I think that's going to be interesting for a lot of brands to manage that. I think. Did you come up with this, or did this come from your own personal AI thing, or you know what I mean? That's going to be an interesting thing for brands to manage, I would imagine.
Definitely, I think like all these things, you're talking about information ultimately, and that's an asset of the business. So at the very least, I'd be encouraging people to use the tools that the business makes available to them, rather than using their own personal stuff.
Yeah, and for the love of God, don't upload any customer data into any AI tools. Well, look, thank you very much. We have one question left, which is a question I ask all my guests, and it revolves around the Everybody Hates Your Brand Room 101. So obviously Room 101 coming from the book 1984, but I'm talking more specifically about the UK television version of Room 101, a game show used to be hosted by, I think the last stuff was Paul Merton, comedian Paul Merton. And essentially people would come on and would say, I really despise these things. I would like to put them into Room 101 forever, purgatory forever. And Paul Merton would decide whether that was going to happen or not. And in this world, I am Paul Merton, but I give my guests every chance to say, okay, what is the one thing that annoys you about? Could be about AI, could be about business, could be about marketing at large, that you would like to see locked away in purgatory for all eternity. So what would that be and why?
It's quite hard to just come up with one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is.
I despise AI first, or digital first, anything like that. I also don't like this sort of lofty use of culture in marketing. We're going to embed ourselves in culture and all this sort of nonsense. So I think probably, if I had to sum it all up, I despise the sort of lazy interchangeability of advertising and marketing, and this sort of view that all marketing is about communications, which is, I actually think, kind of the root of a lot of the problems that the marketing industry has. I've always thought marketing is about understanding consumers and selling products. So I think the moment you let it sort of slip into actually it's about comms and channels, you've kind of lost probably lost the attention of the rest of every other sort of business discipline, and I think that just then leads to all sorts of crazy and sort of sloppy behaviours that mean marketers find it hard to justify their existence.
Yeah, 100%. The amount of times I've been client side and the marketing team has been defined as the colouring in team.
Yeah,
and you're just like, to a degree, the advertising industry and the market, we've done that to ourselves. The whole 4 Ps thing, still stands as a kind of simple way of thinking about things. We're only in control of the one. I know Mark Risson rails about this constantly in his columns. So and I would also say, in terms of interchangeable terms, somebody who says, "What's the difference between branding and marketing?" I saw that the other day. I'm like, "The hell are you talking about?" Yeah. Like, brand building is part of marketing. Marketing's this huge. Don't get me started. Yes, we'll be going on for hours and hours and hours, but that's a good one. That is absolutely going into.
Fantastic.
I don't think I've said no to something yet. I'm going to have to start getting stricter on this stuff. But every time it comes up, someone's like, "Yeah, no, that's really good." No one's said anything yet that I've kind of gone,
you disagree.
Not sure about that, but that one definitely works. Well, look,
fantastic.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's an exciting, scary, interesting world, and I think it's only going to move faster and faster. I think so. I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to talk to us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Rob. Good to see you.
Well, I hope you found that useful and interesting. Agentic AI really feels like a new, unexplored frontier where there's going to be a lot of trial and error to try and figure out how to use it, people scrabbling around looking for great case studies and all sorts of things. So it's going to be an interesting few years. Please check out the show notes for the resources that were referenced in the show, and we'll be back soon, I hope. So until then, take great care and be vigilant out there.